follow-up that has all of the details and project files for you to work on after this session. So just to go through a few things, I want to thank everybody. We had a lot of district participation, so we have Alachua, Baker, Bay, Broward, DeSoto, Flagler, Gadsden, Gilchrist, Hardy, Hernando, Hillsborough, Lafayette, Lake, Leon, Levy, NEFEC, Osceola, Pace, Palm Beach, Pasco, Putnam, St. John, Swanee, Union, USF, Volusia, Wacola, and Washington represented today. So thank you all so much. We appreciate your support. I'm just going to go around. Just to remind you, we'll say Florida Code a lot, and if you're not familiar with Florida Code, it's our Florida-based collaborative on operational data for educators. And the whole purpose of our nonprofit organization is to provide a modern data infrastructure to simplify the integration and use of education data at all levels. And so we have 20 members. Some of our members are represented here today, especially in our presenting. We'll go around and introduce the team that you'll be participating in this professional learning with today. And you'll see a few of them have already turned on their cameras, so it's great. All right, Aaron. So our objectives for today are to learn about the different sources of data that can be analyzed and just to stretch your thinking about what those data are. So are we talking about a PDF? Are we talking about an Excel file? We're talking about a web page or an API. So we'll learn about some of the different sources, but we're not going to go really deep into it because there's so much. It's a very broad area. So we'll talk about some of those things and some tips before you even get started. I know a lot of you just want to jump in and see what's going on. And we'll talk about what I call my 80-20 rule that just kind of helps me remember these things. And then we'll be spending the bulk of our time today practicing modeling and transformations with Aaron Dissler from Volusia. Aaron, you want to give everybody a hey?
Hey, everybody. Good morning.
Hey, everybody. And then after we do some modeling and get stuff ready, some transformations of those data, then we're going to create a visual based on a specific use case. And we have Bob and Chris from Seminole on here to cover that. And at the end of this, we'll also have a Q&A. So if we get close to time, we might stretch into that Q&A, but if you submit an answer or a question, we'll respond with an answer in our follow-up message if we don't get to your question. And as a reminder, we'll be recording, so we'll also send out a link to the recording in those follow-up materials. Aaron, Chris, Bob, are there any other things that you wanted to mention before we get started?
No, looking forward to it.
All right. You know, it's like the beginning of a race, you just want to run. But just to let you know, so we'll be going through data sources and tips, modeling like a pro, and then building a visual with Bob and Chris, and then we'll do some question and answer and talk about next steps. So data sources and tips. This is where we'll get started. And what I want you to do is just think for a moment where you are about like your entire district or your area of responsibility. How well do you know the data sources that are available to you, and how well do you understand how to grab those things or where they're located? And so just to kind of give yourself a benchmark, a 1 would be like, I have no idea who has access to what in my department or my school or my district. A 2 would be, okay, I know that we use certain sources of information. Some of them are on servers, some of them are in flat files or Excel files. A 3 would be, okay, I know where the sources of data are. I know who to talk with to get access to those things. And then a 4 would be, I know all of the data sources that are available. I know who has access to them. I know how to gain them, and I've used them before. So just to kind of think about where you are right now. 1, total noob, just getting started. A 4, you're a real pro. And just kind of keep that in mind as we go along. So I'm Shane J. Fairburn. I'm a supervisor of instructional technology with the Northeast Florida Educational Consortium, and I'm also the chairperson for the Florida Collaborative on Operational Data for Educators. And so I'm just going to go with you for a few minutes about some data sources and some tips. And I'm going to kind of switch this around a little bit just to go with some tips. If you're a note taker, great, awesome. Please feel free to take notes, and again, ask questions as they come to your mind. But know that this and all the other resources will be provided to you as a follow-up. So you don't have to diligently take notes if that's not your style. So here's some key points that I'm going to get into before we talk about the data sources and go a little bit deeper into that. But the 80-20 rule. So what I think of with the 80-20 rule is I spend 80% of my time understanding the use case, building the data model, understanding the data sources that I'm using, and understanding all of the security that goes along with that. So basically, all of the ingredients, all of the tools, everything you need to get ready. If you're a chef, you can call it mise en place. You get all of your things ready first. And then that 20% is really going into the visuals, and how the end user is going to interact with just the visuals on the page or just the way that you're going to display it. But to understand how they're going to display it, you really need to take that 80% of your time to build your use case out. Who's going to be using it? What are they going to be looking at? What's important to them? What are some things that they really care about? What are some things that are nice to know or that you like? And it's good to have an understanding of these are things that we need in order for the visualization, the report to be useful. And these are things that we would like to have or want to have, but aren't really necessary. So when you get to a time crunch, you can prioritize those things that are super important, and those things that are like, oh wow, that'd be neat if we could do this. Those are things that you might want to hold off until you have your proof out there and ready to go. If you jump right in to building visuals without having a full understanding of all the things that Power BI is doing and what it needs from you in order to do that, then you're going to struggle a lot. If you just jump right in, you're like, oh, I want to build some cool charts and stuff. It's really going to be a struggle and you won't have a very good experience. So I would spend some time just really understanding what you want to do, understanding who's going to use it, and then think about that bridge. Okay. So the next point that I wanted to talk about is to know your data and limitations. If somebody says, hey, can you build me a report that has X, Y, and Z, and you have X and Y, and you know that you can answer X and Y, then that Z might need to come from another location, or it might not be an actual factual data source, or it might not be a question that you can answer. So before you get in there, really understand the limitations of what you're working with, not only the types of information that are included, but maybe the access. Do you have access to those particular things? So if you spend that 80% of your time really understanding that piece, you'll be good. And then understand your use case. If you practice the methodology, like project management methodology, software development methodology, you'll really go to that use case. So who's going to be using it? You want to know where they are right now. You want to know what they need. You want to know where they get to, and you want to understand them and their needs. Because when you build that visual, it may look really cool to you. It may look cool to some people in your office or some family members. But if it's not beneficial to them, it's not easy to use. It's difficult to navigate. The colors are contrasting too much. They're not going to have a real good experience. So that's where that last piece on this page comes into those rapid proofs. Here's what it looks like in my brain. Here's what we've talked about. Here's what we've agreed on. Let me show you what I think. And then you get a quick proof out that maybe it doesn't have everything. It's just the minimum pieces. But then you can show it to your end user and have them interact with it and give you some feedback before you complete that big final project. It also lets you test out some things like security or the functionality of certain things that they've asked for, but letting them know that that's part of the process, that you're going to fail early, fail often, and fail forward are the three things that I say. So some other key points: build for others, not yourself. You may have like, oh wow, this would be really awesome to do this. And if you think about that, if you're like, wow, it'd be really awesome if I did this, look at your use case or look at your notes or review any kind of information you have on your use case or the people who are going to be using this report, and ask yourself, is this something that will be beneficial for them, or is this something that I would like? It also helps you from being too invested in your final product and not receptive to feedback. So opening yourself and saying, you know what, it may be perfect for me, but somebody else may struggle with it. And being able to just kind of release yourself and go, okay, let's go back to that use case. Let's go back to exactly how we want that report. You'll be happier. The people who are going to be involved in using your reports and visualizations are going to be happier. So that's a good place to start. And then how's the report going to be shared? So a lot of times we find that districts are using a secure method to send Excel files or CSV files or PDFs. With Power BI, you have a lot of different options. You have an option to share freely to the web, including all the data that are included in your report. And that's okay for things that are that can be shared out. So you might have like school calendars, or you might have a list of events in a school that you put into a Power BI visualization. You don't really care if they people see and build off of that report. So there's that method. And then there's a method where you can share it by embedding it in a web page, and you can do that securely or through that first method I talked about. And then there are people within your organization who can actually interact with your report and then build on top of it. So you can create a data set that you feel confident with all of your measures and calculations that people can use to build reports, but they can't change it. They can build on top of it with their own project, but they can't change your source piece unless they're part of your development team. So think about those things before it's going to be shared out. You can even do something as simple as what we're doing now is creating a project with some files and then sharing that project with you. You bring it locally to your machine, and then you're able to add files and create a project of your own. And then tap into the knowledge base, not only your presenters and facilitators today, but then the people who are participating in this session, and know that we have a rich community for Power BI. It's one of the reasons why it's really picked up in education is because it works well with all the Microsoft products we have, and things are really easy to build, and there's a good community. So YouTube channels, I would suggest Kerbal. She does videos every week. They're really great, and they're focused on what you're actually going to be doing in Power BI. Guy in a Cube, wonderful. SQL BI, again, wonderful. And then DAX.guide is the actual guide to DAX, and you can pull that up in a web page and just have it bookmarked and use it for whatever you need. So if you have questions about a certain thing, what does it do? That's your resource there, that DAX.guide. And I would spend a little bit of time knowing about the possibilities of using it as well. Okay, so I'm going to switch over real quick and just show you some data sources, and then I'll pass it over to Aaron. So I'm going to show you Power BI, and mine might look a little bit different. And this is another tip for you, is that it might look a little bit different, your Power BI. So what you've downloaded right now is called the Power BI Desktop. That's the engine. It has all the stuff you need to get it moving. And you also have the Power BI app. And that is something, if your organization has it, you build basically in the web. And so knowing the difference between those two is going to be helpful as well. I know it seems like I'm not going to spend a lot of time in these connectors, but I want to show you what's available and how to get it. And again, if you have any questions on these things, feel free to reach out to us, or also that knowledge base. So I have right now a project open on my desktop. This is Power BI Desktop. This is the previous version to the current version right now. And all I want to do is connect to some data. So I want to go, okay, how can I get the information in that I need in order to build this report? It's really quite simple. If you come over here, when you have a project open, you'll see a ribbon across the top, and there's a whole lot of stuff up here. So it's good to familiarize yourself with it. But you'll notice that there's a tab that says Get Data. If you have an Excel file, you can get everything ready in that Excel file. You can just hit it, and it will ask you, okay, well, you tell me, what folder do you want me to go to? What Excel file? And you grab that. If it's the current version, you don't need anything special. If it's an older version, you might need a connector, and that's something that you need to know. If you have a Power BI data set, you can click that. You'll see all that are available to you and get started, SQL Server, or you can even create some data on your own that you can practice with. But here's the real kicker. All of these data sources are available to you through Power BI, and each one of them has their own requirements. So these are all of the connectors that are available. And it goes anywhere from just a basic query or text document to JSON, to SharePoint folders and all sorts of things. But once you have these data sources in here, in order to change them, you can go to your transform data and data source settings, or you can go to your file, options and settings, and then data source settings. And this will be helpful as you navigate around in Aaron's session. So Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if there's any questions, Sharad, if you make sure those are at the end, and then we can talk through this. So I'm going to give you control. Aaron, thank you all for your time and attention, and I'm excited to see what Aaron has to offer.
Great, thank you so much, Shane. Okay, so at this point, good morning, everyone. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into a Power BI. And at this point, it's kind of the walk along together through modeling and data modeling. And so let me do a couple of housekeeping things first. So all of the data files were shared out as part of the participation guide. And so there's a data files Google Drive that includes the instructions as well as some of the different items that you might need today. And so we have the Excel files that we're going to be using as our data sources. We also have project files. So we went ahead, and there are two in here. This one says data model only in the file name. So after all the transformations that we do together, this data model is going to be what our end product is before we make any visualizations. So if at any point something comes up, you have to step away, you come back, you might have missed a step, you can always go ahead and just open this one up directly and be able to utilize that for the next part with Bob and Chris as they go into making visuals. So we gave you kind of a nice waypoint for the middle. Then also, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we have some of the actual data transformations in text files that if at some point you miss a step, I'll show you exactly what you can do with these in order to catch up. So before we actually go into data modeling, I think Shane brought up a very important point, which is understanding what our data sources might look like. So I'm going to show you one right now. We'll just kind of walk through its basic structure. So in that way, as we are modeling it and transforming it within Power BI, we know what we're looking at, right? So here, and this is directly from the FLDOE website. These are the 2019 district grades. We're going to be using the 2019 district grades and the 2019 school grades as our data modeling examples throughout today that we will also be building the visuals off of. So within here, we can see that there's some, extra nice reporting that's up top with some image and the title, and then we have our column headers that are tilted there, and then we can see that for this particular file, we have one row per district that includes the achievements and those scores that were reported, as well as the district grade from 2010 all the way up through 2019, with each year being its own column. And I think this is going to be very important as we get into some of the data modeling here in a little bit. So we can see one row per school, and then with these grades, the grades are broken down each year, and I'll show you why that's important very soon. So I just want to show that source before we get into it. So if you are ready, let's go ahead and do some data modeling. I'm going to go ahead and open up a brand new Power BI window, Untitled, and go ahead and close this splash page. I also want to highlight as we go forward that Power BI does a great job of providing links or learning opportunities, quick videos, bite-sized chunks of information that can help you really at any point throughout Power BI and your data modeling and visual creation. So right off the bat, when you open the splash page, there are videos, tutorials, links. So let's go ahead and close that. And just as Shane was talking about with this data, we're going to go ahead and actually use this get data and click Excel. And I went ahead and here's where my data set is. I have this saved locally, and we're going to be opening the district grades XLSX file first. This is where we're going to start off with our modeling. And I know that people will be monitoring the chat throughout this. So Sharad or anyone, if you see something in the chat that is valuable, you want me to pause, please feel free to jump in. So when we click open, we can, it immediately pulls in that Excel file. And what we can see is there are already different ranges that it identified as possible data sources. Okay, so if we were to click really on any of these, it would bring us to what they would refer to as tables, but here we can actually have a subset of the data, and this is our nice preview window. Now what we're going to do is actually click DG, which is this top one, which you can see, remember there was that image and there was a space before it got to the column headers. So this looks very much like the raw data file from that nicely formatted report in Excel. And we can see within this preview window, we can also refresh it if things need to be refreshed. And then it gives us a few options down here at the bottom. Okay, with those options, we have our option to load or to transform data. Now, I would always be very cautious about this clicking of just the load button, because what load is going to do is just create some kind of very standard transformations that we will see when we actually go in to transform the data. And it does those first few automated transformations, and then it makes it available for you right there to start playing around with visuals. But unless that data you are sure was modeled properly, it is always a good idea to go ahead and click transform data in order to have a bit more control over that. So now we have our data source selected of DG, we have our window, we're going to go ahead and click transform data. This is going to open a Power Query Editor window. So we now have two windows that are open. We have our Power Query Editor window and our Power BI desktop window. I'm going to kind of navigate around this window just to give you an idea of the layout in case this is something that is brand new for you. So the first thing we have over here along the left-hand side are the various queries. And we can see that DG is our first query that is being pulled in from our data source of the Excel file. As we develop more queries, this is where they will all be listed. Okay, we're going to go ahead up here to the top, and this ribbon includes a majority of the transformation that you might be making. And this gives you really a wide breadth of options in modeling the data from start to finish. We're going to use a lot from the Home, Transform tab, and the Add Column tab. And so you can see when it comes to date formats, time formats, extracting information, of actually flipping values, replacing values, there's plenty that you can do. And so we will be utilizing those throughout. Now, I can tell you that there are also, within these steps that we see up here in the ribbon, there are other ways to do those same steps. And so as we model a few of the later data sources and queries, I will try and use a few of those other ones just so you can see. But again, this is really personal preference on how to utilize them. And then over here with the query settings, we have our, let's zoom in over here for a second. So with query settings, we have our properties where we actually will rename in our table, as well as the applied steps. So we can see that these initial steps right here of source, navigation, promoted headers, change type, like I mentioned, if you were to click that load button, this is probably what's going to happen, is just these first 4 steps. And as we load other data sources, we're going to see those first couple of steps happen automatically. So with these applied steps, what is really nice about these applied steps is we can actually click back through them and see where it went from, okay, the source is going to be an Excel file. Here are all the options. We selected DG. It navigates to DG as a sheet. It promotes the first row as a header, and it changed the type. Now with this changing of type, it is going to base that and profile that type that it selects based on the first 1,000 rows of your source. So in this case, each of these columns, especially since our true column headers are a row, it's going to assume that they are text or any type for the data type. So again, what's nice is we can see these steps, and as we add more, you'll see them start to accumulate over here, and we can see step by step exactly what happened. And then within the middle, as I was just showing you, we have our query display. And so this allows us to see how the data looks through the various applied transformations. And right above that is our formula bar, where we can see the most recent or the current step that has occurred. So in this case, that changed type, and we can see that it took each column and changed it to whatever type it needed or believed was appropriate. Now, Power Query in this language is also called M, and there's a great deal of documentation on the various functions that are available through Microsoft within the M language, and I will even show you how you can navigate to that directly from Power BI. And so the last thing I want to show you before we start to do any of our transformations is this advanced editor within the query part of the home ribbon. When I pull up Advanced Editor, this actually shows us all of these applied steps as kind of one total query. And so, as I mentioned before, those text files that were provided are the actual advanced editors for the queries that we are going to be doing for the district and for the school data sources. And I just want to point out one thing. So if at any point, maybe you miss a step or something's not quite going right, it happens, right? We're using technology. So if at any point you need to, you can always pull in this advanced editor, copy and paste it directly into the window. The only thing that you're going to have to do, is I put a little box of here where it says insert file path here. All you need to do is just grab the text of the file path for the actual file on your computer where you have it and just replace this with that, and it should go ahead and load and apply all of the necessary steps. All right, that's enough talking about that. Let's start diving in and doing some transformations to our data. We're going to go ahead and close this advanced editor. And the first thing we want to do is we want to use this property name to go ahead and change this query. And we're going to call this district _ stats 2019. Okay, as soon as we change the name here, we can see that the query name changes along the left-hand side. Now, we know that our column headers are actually this second row, and so we want to get those to be our actual column headers for our query, and so we can use this remove rows under the reduce rows option, and it gives us plenty of different things we can choose from. We're going to click remove top rows. It's going to ask how many. Well, in this case, we just want to get rid of one because we're going to use another step to promote that first row as a header. So we're just going to remove one row. Okay, it places our column headers in that first row position, and we can use this other transformation of use first row as headers. What you'll notice when we click use first row as headers is it does two steps, not just one of making that promotion, but it also goes ahead and starts to change those data types now based on profiling what is in the remainder of the column. And so we can see, especially as we went from remove top rows, this district number went from a text after we promoted. It then changed it to a number because all of the remaining options were a number. Now, it tries to anticipate what those values are, but when we click on and we look at the district number, and you probably have all experienced this in Excel, sometimes we have that leading 0, and we want to leave that because we don't really necessarily want it to remove that and turn it into a number as it assumed we wanted to do. So we're going to go ahead and actually change this data type back to text and get that leading 0 back in the position that it's supposed to be. So when we click here on the actual data type that's currently 1, 2, 3 for our whole numbers. It gives us a variety of options of data types that we can choose from, and we're going to select text. Now, what's important here that I want to point out is we're going to get a bit of a warning, and that's because our last step that we did was a change data type step. So it's going to ask us, do you want to add this as a new step? So after we've already done that first change, do you want to make another change? Or since we're really, if we just did a change data type, do you actually want to replace that current step with this new data type? Just so I can show you a bit more of these applied steps and how this works, I want you just to pause here for a second. I'm going to show you and then come back. What we're really going to want to do is the replace current, but I'm going to show you what happens if we click that add new step. So after I did add new step, we can see that since it changed that data type to a whole number and removed that leading 0, and now used this change type as to text after that, it assumes take that value and change it to a text, leaving off that leading 0. Okay, but what's so nice about these applied steps is as you are experimenting with the various steps and the various transformations, you can very easily just take a step back, right? We're able to navigate back and forth to see what the data looked like at different points, and we can go ahead and just click X and take us back, get rid of that step completely, which is very helpful, especially as you're doing some complex data modeling and you're like, maybe this will work, and it doesn't quite work. So now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and click again and click text. And what I want you also, as I'm doing this, to pay attention to is up here, we can see these change types that occurred. And right here, we have district number is currently an integer type. So once we click text and click replace current, we now see that district number has now changed to type text. Our leading zeros are back, and it keeps us from adding more and more steps. Now, these are very small data sources that we're using comparatively. But the idea of trying to consolidate steps and keep the number of transformations, the more you can push back and combine, the better it's going to be for your refresh times and for your performance. Okay, at this point, our data is looking pretty good. We have the items in place that we want. All of our columns are here as we scroll over. The data types seem pretty good. What I want us to do now is we're going to duplicate this query to do some different transformations. So when I click over here on district stats and I right click, it is going to give us some options. We have here 2 options, duplicate or reference. Now, referencing is when you reference an established query, it takes the state of that query as of the final step that has been applied to that source query prior to making any new transformation. So this is very important that if you were to reference this query, it is actually going to make the district stats 2019 query itself the data source. Now, if at any point you went back and said, oh, well, I need to make a change, I need to change some columns, I'd like to get rid of a few things in that district stats 2019, any changes you make to that are going to also be reflected in your referenced query. So that's just an important piece. Sometimes I can do some basic modeling and then reference and then use those references for the end result. In this case, what we're going to do is actually duplicate, and it's going to create district stats 2019 2. What you'll notice is over here, all of these applied steps are the exact same applied steps for district stats 2019, going all the way back to the actual data source. So these 2 queries now operate completely independently of each other. They make direct calls back to that data source. They go through all of the same steps. It can be fine to do duplication of queries. It makes sense to do that in a lot of cases. Where it can get a little tricky is when you have really large data sets and now you're kind of doubling the amount of time that you're trying to reference a particular data source. But in our case right now, works just fine. So we have these sources all the way up through this change type. And I want to go ahead and we're going to call this district grades YOY for year over year. And we're going to do some different transformations to this query. in a moment. So let's set that off to the side and go back to our district stats 2019. So like we mentioned when we looked at the data source, a lot of these are single row per district. And as we scroll over, we also notice that these grades, there's a grade for each year going down. We're going to do some different transformations for these grades and actually have them be in a different format when we get to district grades by OY. So we don't even need them here in district stats. And this is really important in data modeling, is you are trying to get your end result that is actually being imported into Power BI to be as small and efficient as you can, ensuring that you have the right pieces of data. So we want to get rid of our grade columns within our district stats 2019 query. And the way that we're going to do that is from this manage columns section on the home tab. And right here, there are two options. We have choose columns or remove columns. Now, choose columns is actually going to ask you what columns do you want to keep, and any other columns that would exist will be removed. Now, choose columns can be really helpful, especially as you're getting to like a final product before it goes into your data model, because if someone at any point were to update a query, were to add an additional column to a data source, this choosing of columns is going to ensure that that doesn't come through, doesn't make it too far through your Power Query, through the query transformation to the end to impact your data model. So I always find that choose columns is a better option. Remove columns, which we will use in a little bit, is utilized if you have a column that you use for another transformation and then you don't need it anymore. You can use it and then remove it, so then it doesn't actually make it through to the final data model. So for choose columns, if we click on the down arrow and click choose columns, it's going to give us all of the column headers as a list with checkboxes. We're going to leave all of them checked. The only ones that we're going to uncheck are any of these ones at the end that have grade associated with them, because we're going to use those in a different query altogether. Okay, once we remove those grade columns, we click OK, we will see that it added this removed other columns step. It shows that this is actually a select columns and picked which ones we wanted. What's also nice with these applied steps is for a number of these with this gear icon, if you were to click on the gear, it allows you to go back and make changes to your steps as well if necessary. So we can see promoting, we can also, as we get onto adding some columns here in a little bit, you can click on that, make adjustments to your additions. So this applied steps, always a very beneficial component of Power Query. Now, just in the sake of documentation, for those that would like to, they automatically name them. So in this case, we have promoted headers and promoted headers 1. If you would like to give more purposeful names and more descriptive names, you can always click and actually rename the step. So in that way, anyone who is looking at the applied steps can see exactly what you're doing. It can just be a helpful piece of documentation. It takes a little bit. All right, so at this point, I'm feeling good about District Stats 2019. Again, if at any point as we've been going through this, you've had to pause, you can always use that advanced editor and go ahead and drop that in and put in your file path, and it will do all of the transformations as we've just completed them. So let's go ahead and move over to District Grades YOY. So District Grades YOY, as we remember, applied all of the steps up through that change type 1 before we removed the other columns. So we have all these transformations that have been applied. And in this case, now we do not need to have all of these other columns because they exist in District Stats 2019, single row per district. But we do want to have those grades. So we're going to actually take and do a choose columns again. And for this one, we are going to keep, I'm going to unselect all and keep district number and the grades. Okay, all of the grades here. And all those checked and click OK. Now we can see the only things that we have left are our district number, which we'll kind of use as a key here in a few moments. And then we have our grades for each of those years. Now, what we will see is if we were to utilize these grades as they are currently structured, and you were to do measures and counts and try and do some visuals on them, you're going to have to use each column individually. And so you'd have a visual related to 2019, related to 2018, or do some more advanced DAX queries to determine which column to pull it from. But that can be a lot. So what we're going to do is actually get this down to a column that has the school year and the associated grade. So each district will have the district, the year, and the grade, and we'll have multiple records, one for each year and for each grade. So what we're going to do that is with district number highlighted, okay, we are going to come up to this transform tab, and there is in the any column section, click on unpivot columns. We're going to click on the down arrow, and it gives us a few options: unpivot columns, unpivot other columns, or only selected columns. In this case, we want to keep district number, and we want to unpivot these other columns, which will take the column header, turn it into a value, and associate the value with it. So in this case, we're going to click unpivot other columns, and that's exactly what we're going to see. We have two columns that are created: an attribute column and a value column. That attribute is now what was previously the column header, and we have the value where the column and the row intersected. So in this case, District 01, 2019, a grade of A. This is going to be very helpful in the data model and what Bob and Chris will be showing you soon. The next thing we want to do, we see that there's these different column headers. We have the 15, which is the informational baseline grade of 2015 versus grade here. We can replace values. We can do a few of those things, but I want to show you how to actually make a custom column using some very basic M language to strip out just the year that we can use for our data model. In this case, we're going to click Add Column. And there's plenty of options here that we can use. We're going to use Custom Column. And with Custom Column, it's going to bring up, and we have our new column name. And in this case, we're going to call this School Year. There's going to be no space. And we're going to type in our formula here, but I just want to point out that Power BI has this learn about Power Query formulas that if you were to click on that, it can take you to the Power Query page within Microsoft, and you can actually look at some of the M language syntax that's necessary. They've also tried to include better IntelliSense moving forward within this window. And so we're going to start to type this out. What we want are those last 4 characters of the attribute column. And so in this case, for M, we have text. We can see the IntelliSense tries to take over, and end. Okay, this is kind of similar to what you might find with Excel or with some SQL of write. We have text end. We'll open that up, and now if we were to do an open square bracket, it brings up our column, our available column options, and we want to go ahead and select attribute. Click comma, and for that second argument, we want those last 4 digits. Okay. With those last 4 digits, we're going to see if there are no syntax errors and click OK. This adds in our school year, and we can see that it does just as we expected. It strips out those last 4 characters and provides us a new column. Since we now have this, we also value, not very descriptive. We want our end data model to have something a bit more descriptive. We're going to right click. Okay, we can also, same thing up here under the home, under the transformation tab, you can actually rename the column. Okay, and we're going to rename this to grade. Since we now have what we wanted from the attributes column, and that step was applied earlier, we can now get rid of attribute. We don't need it anymore. So we'll go back over to home and remove column, and now it's gone. So at this point, we now have our district, our grade, and our school year. Now, before we move into the other data sources, I'm just going to pause for a second, see if there are any questions while I also need to take a moment just to switch out my headset. Just take 1 second.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but this is some great information. And I really like that Aaron shared that the advanced editor that you see up there, if you get behind at any time or you want to catch up or you want to see what's happening in a certain step, you can open your advanced editor, but you can also take that text file that we have in the folder and just dump it in there and do all of those transformations. It's kind of like a nice shortcut to get you back up. All right, Aaron, I'll let you take back over.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So I did see too that Michael mentioned, would you want to convert school year to a data type, and that really at this point, being that we're going to use it more for an x-axis, more of as a category versus a date, we can leave it as a text option. But there could be some use for a date if necessary. There's plenty of documentation out there about the utilization of date tables that we would have school year as an option. But in this case, for what we're going to use it more as to categorize into group grades with our visuals, we can leave it as text. That's a good question. And Sean said, yes, I will certainly try and slow down just a little bit here. What's nice is we're actually going to be doing these same or very similar transformations with the schools. So if at some point with the stats or with the grades YOY, I can kind of slow it down here too. And please put something into the chat if at any point you need me to stop, slow down, repeat myself, happy to do that. Okay, so at this point now, we saw when we were in that Power BI desktop that we were able to get data from here. This can be helpful when you are going to do an initial data set and pull in that first source. What's also nice is we can actually do those pulling in of new queries and new sources directly from Power Query too. So we don't even have to leave here in order to add some new sources. So here we have new source. It'll even show us some recent sources too. And we're going to go ahead and do Excel again. And in this case, we're going to click that school grades 2019. Okay, once we open that up, it's going to give us that very similar navigator pane. So this is that navigation applied step as to, well, there are plenty of ranges here. What would you like me to do? And that SG is our school grades option. And we can actually see, if we go back to the data source, that there's a bit more information at the top of the school grades than there is the district grades. So we can see there's some more null values at the very top. But what's also nice is when you're in this Power Query and you're doing a new source, it doesn't assume you want to load and go. It just assumes you want to transform the data. So when we click OK with that SG data source, it's going to be added over here to our queries. And just as we had seen with the previous examples, it automatically grabs source, navigation, promote headers, and change type. So at this point, we can go back and we can alter steps and change pieces, but we are going to change the name here to school _ stats 2019. Okay, so now we have district stats 2019 where it's a single row per district. So now school stats, which is a single row per school. Now we need to do a very similar transformation of getting rid of these top rows. Before I do that, let me point this out to you. And just in terms of like surveying your data, there's this kind of status bar that Power Query provides you that in this case is that kind of teal color. The teal color is if data and valid data exists in that particular column. Now you'll see that it does not go to the end because there are some null values that exist here in this first column. Okay, we can also see that for column 2. It might just be these nulls. There might be nulls further down. Really, Power Query is going to give you those first 1,000 rows, but if there's more than 1,000, then we aren't going to see all of the data. So this can be a really good quick status check as to, is this a fully complete column? Are there nulls? And I believe that even if we were to hover over that status bar, and this has been a little bit finicky for me in the past, is it actually can show you that in this case there are 99% of them are valid, there are no errors, and there are 3 empty. Okay, so once we get rid of these 3, then it should go to a fully teal bar. If there are any errors, you'll actually see this will be kind of a hashed version that's red, that you can see where the errors are, and you can do some error handling there too. So this is just kind of a nice check, and you can scroll across and look at all your columns and see as you make certain transformations, does that lead to errors, or does it actually provide you with a full data set? So just a quick thing to point out. Okay. So at this point, we want to go ahead and do our remove rows, and we want to, in this case, we want to get rid of those top 3 rows, right? Because our column headers are in row number 4. So we want to make sure that that 4th row becomes our first row, so then we can use that use first row as headers transformation and get those where we want them. So in this case, number of rows is going to be 3, and click OK. So it uses the M language, converts that to a step. And now we have our column headers in that first row. So if I click use first row as headers, it does the same thing that we expected, right? It does those 2 steps, promotes the headers, and then also changes the data type now based on the new profiling of the top 1,000 rows. Within those top 1,000 rows, as we can see again, what happened to our district number is that leading 0 was removed. It was changed to a number. Once again, trying to anticipate our needs. And then what also happened is that it did the same thing to our school number column. So we want to change these back to text, and we actually want to, if you remember from our district stats example, that we want to replace this step, which currently changes our district number and our district number to type integer, as well as our school number, which in this case is type integer. So right now we want to change these steps to type text. Now, as you become more familiar, you can actually go ahead and just change. You can see how the syntax looks. You can make those changes here, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on the data type currently, and we're going to do text, and it's going to ask us that same question, right? We just changed the data type. What do you want us to do? Replace that current step with what you want it to be, or do you want to add it as the next step? In this case, replace current. We see our leading 0 come back, and we see, just as you would in Excel, generally numbers are aligned to the right, text is aligned to the left, moves over to the left. And we're going to do the same thing for your school number, so that way our school numbers can also get those leading 0s back that they need. So again, click on the data type and our type text. We're going to replace that current step. And this is looking good. So just as we did kind of after we had changed those data types during district, we're going to duplicate the query just as we did with that district grades by OI, because you guessed it, we're going to create school grades by OI, because each of our schools, and this data actually goes back even further in time to all the way back to 1999 with a lot more nulls there. Okay, so with our school stats, we're going to right click and click duplicate. Just as we saw with district grades and district stats, it applies all of those steps and creates its own individual connection back to the data source. And we're going to call this one school grades YOY. Okay, for school grades YOY, let's go back to school stats. And since we're going to be doing the grades over in the other table, we can get rid of them here in the school stats table. So school stats, and we want to choose our columns again. Okay, again, choosing columns versus removing columns just is more helpful and more purposeful in the selection of your data. So choose columns here, leave all of these selected, and now we're going to, from 1999 all the way to 2019, we are going to unselect those columns. Okay, almost there. All right, we're back to the 90s now. So we removed those grades. We're leaving every other piece of information because that is a single piece of information for just 2019. And that's fine. We're going to have one row per school. Looks great. When I click on that, we have our select columns, and our grade columns are now gone. So we have with school grades YOY, since we now have that single row per school over here, we're now going to do that kind of more advanced unpivot and get all those grades from 99 to 2019 for each school. So school grades YOY, I'll make sure we're in that query. And now we are going to do another choose columns and click choose columns. And from here, let's go ahead and do an unselect. And at this point, there are actually only there are going to be two pieces of information that we want, and I'll show you why. I'm actually going to lead us toward an error in our data model to then backtrack you and kind of show what did that error look like, and then how do we fix it. So in this case, we're going to click district number and school number, just those two from this first part, and then all of our grades, okay? Again, district number, school number, and each of the grade columns. All right, we have them all. Everything else is unselected. Again, district number, school number, and our grades 2019 to 1999. When we click OK, those are the only ones that are selected. We can see that up here in our formula bar. And now we need to do that unpivot, right? We need to get back to that attribute column and a value column. So a district number. And we're actually going to control and click. So we have both district and school number selected, because those ones we want to be kind of the groupings, and we want those to be in every row. And then the other ones are going to pivot down into that attribute and value combination. So with these two selected, if we go to transform, unpivot columns, and we're going to do unpivot other columns, right? We selected the ones that we want to be kind of stationary. And when we do unpivot columns, same thing happens. We can now see for school 0031 in district 01, there is multiple records of those all the way back from 1999 all the way up to 2019 with their associated values. So what we would expect too is that not all of these schools existed back in 1999. And so in this case, we would expect that our values would have some null, some empty values for those particular schools, until they were built and established. Okay, so at this point too, we want to create that school year. We're going to use that text approach, and we will add a column. Okay, so again, from the add column ribbon, custom column, and we're going to change this to school year. Okay, for school year, again, we are taking it from the text. Let's see if I can pull this over. We're taking it from the text column, or from the attribute column, which is a text type. So we need to do text dot end. Okay, is the method that we're going to use. In this case, what's so nice about this IntelliSense, let me zoom in here, is it again asks us for two arguments for this particular function. It's asking for where is this text coming from, as well as how many places do you want. This can be really beneficial. The IntelliSense honestly has improved dramatically over the last few upgrades and updates that they've done to Power BI. So if we come back to that text end, we can always reference our columns in square brackets within Power Query. So in this case, we have our attribute and comma to give our second, okay, to give our second argument, which is how many spots. We want 4, close those parentheses up, and no syntax errors. Looks good. Okay, just for a second, if you're in a little too small, just in case you wanted to see. Again, text, end, and then within the parentheses, the column and the spots that you'd like to include. And we're gonna click OK. That school year now exists. We would like value to be more descriptive. So in this case, I'm actually going to, instead of using the top ribbon, I'm going to use a right click on the column header, which gives us a number of the transformations that we can do. And I'm going to scroll on down here to rename. And we're going to change value to grade because that's what it is. And since we have grade, now we have our school year, the kind of valuable piece of the attribute column. We don't need attribute anymore. We can either go back to we can highlight that column, either go back and remove columns here. We can also right click and remove, okay? 2 options, personal preference. Some people really like the ribbon. Some people like to just do some right clicking. We click remove, and now we have district number, school number, grade, and school year. Okay. So the last thing that I want us to do right now in Power Query is just to give one more example of how you can create data or get data. And that is to enter data directly into Power Query as a new table. So this table doesn't exist anywhere else. You're not pulling in a CSV or anything, but you just want, and I think of this more in terms of like dimension type tables where it's going to be a small grouping, right? Some categories and descriptions that you might want to just go ahead and have available right in your Power BI model. And so what I want us to do is for these grades, and we're not going to really use the dimension for this purpose once we get to the visualizations, as far as I remember, but it at least gives us a chance to show you this enter data option. So if I click up here for enter data, this table and this query that we're creating lives directly in Power Query, right? Nowhere else, and it then is pulled into your Power BI model. So it's only within Power BI. So with this table, we have the ability to construct it up here as well as our name down here. And so first thing I want us to do is change the name from table to, I'm going to call this dim, since this is more of a common thing, I guess, when you have dimension tables. So just as an example for that. And dim grade is what we're going to call it. Okay, so dim grade will be the name of our table. All right. Now up here, with these, we can insert rows, we can insert columns, we can add in our values, we can change column names. So in this case, I want to go ahead and change column 1 to grade. And if I hit tab, it allows me to do another column. And in this case, I'm going to do sort. Okay, because with the alphabetical sorting of grade, but also if we wanted to have like a sort or an order and you wanted to be able to have a numeric value associated with that grade to do other calculations, this could be something that you would do. If you wanted to see if a grade improved 1, well, the sort column could give you that improvement or that numeric ability to see if your grade improved from a B to an A or so on and so forth. So this is just an example for us to use this grade. So in this case, we have our grades, and if I hit enter, it adds in more column or more rows. So we're going to do A, B, C, D, F, okay, for our grades. And the associated sort is, in this case, our F is 0, our D is 1, C is 2, B is 3, from a GPA type approach. So we have A is 4. Okay, so this is all of our table. This is it. This is all we're going to have. So if you can create this table, this is what it's going to look like. All right, so I'll give a moment for people to create this dimensions table. Because the next thing that we're going to do is move from Power Query over to Power BI Desktop and show you how the relationships look and how we can model that within Power BI Desktop. There is going to be an issue that we're going to run into that we're going to have to jump back into Power Query to fix and to resolve really quickly prior to then handing it over for some visuals. I know we're running a little long in terms of the modeling, but right, if as Shane mentioned, that 80% is the modeling and that 20% is actually building out and dragging and dropping into the visuals, which is always the fun part to do. So, you know, we will certainly get there, but just hang with me a little bit longer on this modeling piece. Okay, so, should have just brought me back here. All right, so in Power Query, we now have catch up with advanced query. Yeah, yes, absolutely, Debbie. That's fine. In fact, I'll certainly give a moment as I get over to use those advanced editors. So, like I mentioned before, if at any point right now, if maybe there's something we haven't caught up with, you can certainly grab that advanced editors and drop those in here. So, if, for example, with District Stats 2019, we didn't catch all of the steps, we can use that advanced editor pane and just drag, copy all, paste in that advanced editor text file that I provided. And the only thing that you're going to have to do is just update this file path for where your file exists. Now, what I do want to point out is, so we have just a couple more transformations on the Power Query side and a few things that we're going to do within Power BI Desktop using DAX language. So if at some point, because I know we're going to kind of keep progressing, there is that data model only PBIX file that is already available to you that you can use to catch up and be ready for those visuals if we're not there yet. Okay, so that it does give a waypoint for you to just pull that file down, open that up, and you'll be ready to go with Bob and Chris when it comes to the visualizations if you haven't gotten all of the queries exactly as we have them defined. Okay, and so I will kind of slow down, but also want to give us some time with those visuals, and that data model only Power BI PBIX file is going to be a great tool for you in that next part. Okay. All right.
Aaron, I just wanted to mention a thing before we go into the
please.
Yeah, just think of it as you're an artist right now, and these are all of your different tools. So you're able to do things in a non-linear way, and that's okay. You don't have to do them any specific way as long as the result is the same. And that's the freedom of that DAX language. As long as you don't violate the syntax, you can create some really cool measures that can be super basic or maximized for efficiency. But just be patient with yourself because there's a lot to learn, and sometimes it's good to just go in there and make some errors and to learn from that as well.
Yeah, great point. Great point. In fact, there are times where I will do a bunch of transformations over here in these applied steps and get down toward the end and realize that one of those steps I probably should have made much earlier. And so trying to move things and reshape things to make it a bit more efficient. So it is very, very helpful. And like we'll see in just a moment, there are things that you might have assumed were the case, but aren't once you start to actually do some of those relationships, and you need to go back into Power Query to, again, tweak those queries a bit to get them to be able to have those relationships and start to model off of them. Okay, so at this point, with what we have set up, we have five queries established: District Stats 2019, the YOY, School Stats 2019, its associated YOY, and this dim grade. When we are ready to move from Power Query over to the Power BI Desktop, we are going to close and apply. What that's going to do is it's going to go to those data sources, run them through Power Query, utilizing that query language, and it's going to then take your end result as of your last step and make that available to you in Power BI Desktop. So let's go ahead, and if we're ready, we're going to click close and apply. You'll see that there are pending changes in your queries, and we'll start to see that it's going to load, and it's going to load, and it's going to even detect relationships. You can turn off detect relationships or do those relationships on your own, but some people like to have it on. I've been burned once or twice by it before, but I think that's okay for this one in particular. All right, I'm going to collapse these. And well, first let me show you that we started off on this is the building of the actual report page, and this is where we'll spend time with those visuals. We can see now that for fields, we now have our queries and our data that are now available, okay, just as we've created them. And if we click on these carets, we can now see all of those columns, and this we can tell is a numeric column. We also have along the side our data tab. With the data tab, you can actually look at the table formats for each of these queries. So I use this a lot for checking measures and did it count properly? So I'll do some filtering here to get some counts down the bottom just once or twice to make sure that things are looking pretty good. And the last thing is going to be this modeling view. And so with this modeling view, and I'll try and, without making it too small for you, just try and get all of them here into the pane. Now we can see that it automatically tried to, also, yes, thank you, Shane. So you can also sort and filter within this section. Any filtering you do here does not impact your data model. So this is nice to be able to look at kind of the raw data and make sure that your visuals are lining up with that without actually impacting your data model or having to build out other measures. So I use that a lot for sorting and filtering. Okay, so I'm going to reorder these a little bit, but we can see that it tries to, based on the information it has, create particular relationships. So we can see that we have, in this case from dim grade, we have a one-to-many relationship between grade and the district grades YOY grade. We can, when we click over, when we hover over another relationship, we can see that district stats 2019 is actually associated to school grades YOY based on district number because this is a one-to-many relationship. But what's really interesting is we don't see school stats, which we know is a single row per school, associated with school grades YOY. There's no relationship there. Before we investigate that a bit more, I just want to kind of just reshuffle these a bit. You can drag and drop to move your columns, I'm sorry, not your columns, your queries, wherever you would want them. So in this case, I'm going to move our district grades over to one side and school stuff on this side. So it's there we go, a bit more organized. So all of these relationships look good. Wouldn't want to change them except for this one, right? I don't necessarily want district stats to have relationship directly to school grades YOY. It's not going to be helpful for me. What I want is I want the school to be associated with its grades, and that's not currently here. What I'm going to do is if I right click on while the relationship is highlighted and click delete, we can go ahead and delete this relationship. Okay, so we're going to delete the relationship between school grades YOY and district stats 2019. Once we delete that, now I want school grades YOY to be associated with school stats 2019. Okay, so the relationship I would think would be based on school number. So if I grab school number and just hold down on it and drag it up to this other one, to school number, to try and create that relationship, is going to give me an error. Okay, and that error says that there is a many-to-many relationship. So that means that in the school stats 2019 school numbers, there are duplicates in the school number. Okay, so that makes sense now that I think about it, right? So school number you could have the same school number, but the district is different. So in this case, it is not a unique value as we need it to be. So we can't create that many-to-many relationship. It is, you never want to make a relationship many-to-many. There's a lot to it. So I was always very cautious about that. We always want to try and go one-to-one or one-to-many. So in this case, we need to do something about it. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our school stats 2019 and our school grades YOY, and we are going to create our own key column in order to get that relationship established, okay, to make a unique value on school stats 2019 and then associate it to its many options over within school grades YOY, all right? All right, so let's cancel that. We don't want to make that relationship. Okay, let's leave those separate. What we can do before we jump into that is actually take grade here and associate it with the dim grade. So that way this dimension is looking at district grades as well as school grades. Okay, so let's fix our issue here with the key. The way we're going to do that, just as Shane showed at the beginning, is we're going to use this transform data, right? Before we got to Power Query by using get data, transforming it. Now we can actually go right into transform data and look at our current queries that we have available. So for school stats 2019, we're going to add a column, okay? So we're going to appear to our add a column ribbon and go to custom column. Now, before I click on custom column, we can see here that district number as well as school number are both text. Those are from our earlier transformations that we made. So in this case, we can use text syntax for creating our custom column, all right? And in this case, we're going to create our custom column, and that custom column is going to be called district school key, all right? District school key. And however you want, I'm using underscores, it's really up to you, but I would say no spaces, right? With district number, okay, so we can actually go ahead and drag and drop or double click on district number, excuse me, and it will drop it right in. Okay, we could also click that open square brackets, select district number. So we double click, district number is now there. With the M text syntax, we can actually use an ampersand to do some concatenation of a text string. So we're going to do a district number and okay, thank you, Julie. Yes, really quick, before I jump into that, let me show you. So under Power BI Desktop, where'd you go? Come on back. Right here, this transform data, it's on the home ribbon. This transform data is how we got back to Power Query. And that allows us to go back and look at any of the queries that we have and make those changes. So with that, we are on that school stats 2019, add a column, custom column, and we have district number that we've added in. We're using that ampersand. And now what I want to do is we actually want it to be district number dash school number. So we're going to add in our own, okay, double quotes, little dash, another ampersand, and school number. I will zoom in on this for people to see too. Okay. All right. So we have here district number, ampersand, our dash, okay, within quotes, and then our school number. And this is going to use that first text at 01 dash, and then with our school number. Okay. And when we click OK, it's going to add that column at the very end, and boom, just as we expected, we have our 01-0031. That looks good. Now we need to have the similar key over on the school grades YOY, because we need to have that same key in both spots to create that relationship. And so for this, we're going to go ahead and again, click on school grades YOY, custom column, and we can call this the same thing. Okay, district school key. We'll do our district number, double click. And I'm putting some spaces just more for you all to see, but the spaces are not required necessarily within the M language. It can just be a little bit easier to read. We have our ampersand, and then we have our dash, and then we will add our school number. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And district school key, district number, dash, school number. It was nice to you if you need. Shane did just put in the chat both DAX as well as M operators. Within Power Query, we're using M, and we're going to use DAX here in just a minute once we're back in Power BI desktop. Okay, so district number dash school number, and we click OK, and it creates that key. So now we have that. That was the last piece that we needed. We needed a key on both of those particular queries to create that relationship, hopefully, right? Because now we should have a unique value for school stats that can then be associated with its corresponding values in the grades query. If we're good with it, that looks good, we click close and apply. What we're going to see is now it knows that we have a relationship. We can now use this key, and that key it detected is the relationship between those particular columns. All right, we are done with Power Query, folks, for now. So let's talk a little bit about the other side of data modeling, which is within DAX here. Okay, so all the information we have imported from our data sources, funneled it through these transformations to get it into the end data model that exists here. We can also use DAX, which is data analysis expressions, okay, that's what DAX is, to create columns within our data model, to create measures that we can use to do some aggregations, and we can even create full DAX tables. Okay, DAX is a very, very powerful language. You'll notice that some of the pieces look a little bit like Excel functions, but don't let that fool you. You might have a bit more familiarity with it, but there are plenty of wonderful resources out there around DAX, and Shane mentioned a bunch at the beginning, and I've seen a few of them pop up in the chat as well. So let's use a little bit of DAX here to enhance our model. The first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to create a calculated DAX column on one of our tables. Okay. With this, if we go back to our data view, and we're going to, under the school stats 2019 query, if we scroll all the way over, we can see that there's this school type column, and those school types, the values that are within school type are 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, we really don't have any other information right now besides those school types, but that really isn't going to be beneficial to our end user, right? To have those school types. So it would be more beneficial to have a text description for what that school type actually is. We're going to create that column now using DAX. Within our data view, and we're on our school stats 2019 query, gives us some options up here along the ribbon, okay? We are going to be using, under calculations, this new column option, okay? New column is going to allow us to do calculations for every row within this column. So what we are looking to do is we're looking to convert our 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s over to a more user-friendly text description. So we'll go ahead and click on new column, and you're going to see in the formula bar up top that it starts with column equals. Okay, it's ready for you. With column, we're going to change that column to school type text. Okay, this is so that way it gives us another field, another value that we can use within our visualizations. Within the visualizations, we if you were to hit enter, okay, it's a little bit finicky. If you hit enter, it just assumes you're done, but we're or not. So it's always Shift Enter to drop to your next line. With DAX, there is a recommendation out there that you actually do format it and use enters and spaces versus trying to just do Excel all in a single row and a single line. So that's what I'm going to do here. So Shift Enter, we're going to do switch, and we're going to do an open parentheses, and it gives us a bit of that IntelliSense. We need an expression, we need a value 1, the result 1, value 2, result 2, so on and so forth. So in this case, what we are basing this whole expression on, what we want to do a switch statement on, so very similar to kind of an if statement, right? Switch statements, if statements. So we're going to do school stats 2019. As soon as I start to type in the name of the query, it recognizes, okay, first the whole query and then each of those fields. What I'm going to do is scroll down, and I want to do, these are all alphabetical, is school type. Okay, if I double click, it drops it in there. So what I want to do that is school underscore stats 2019 school type is 1. Then I would like it to put in elementary. Okay. If it is type 2, then I would like it to put in middle. If it is type 3, then I would like to put in high. And if it is type 4, I'd like to put in combination. Okay, and then we close those parentheses.
You forgot a closing quote.
Thank you. I just saw that. I was like, why is that bracket red? Because I think it's part of the string. Okay, thanks. All right, so with that switch, we now have school stats 2019, and in that data model only Power BI, this already exists, okay? So with that switch statement, if I hit enter now, we can see that it evaluates that for every row and converts our ones to elementaries. And if I click on this down arrow, we can see that it did for the other ones as well, okay? Perfect. Okay, so the next piece is I'm gonna kind of continue on because I know we are really running out of time, and I apologize to Bob and Chris, is to just create really 2 basic measures. And I'm going to create them in a DAX table. It's gonna be a blank table. This again is in that Power BI data model only PBIX file. And so if I click new table, I can actually create a table that is completely blank. And this is, as we can see here, oh, it went away. Come on back. Write a DAX expression to create a new table. You can create a table using DAX. If you create a new table, and you'll see that this is common in a lot of the tutorial videos, is to create a measures table. So a place that whenever you develop your DAX measures, you have one place that you're putting them. You can put them on each of your tables, each of your queries, but it can be really hard to organize. So I always like to, just as kind of like a best practice, create an all measures table that is blank. Okay, if I hit enter, it's going to create that table. There's nothing in it besides a blank column. But it just gives me one place that I can go ahead and put any measures I create. We can put them all right here. So with that, I want to create 2 measures. There are 3 that you're going to see within that PBIX data model only. The last one is going to be a slicer background. You can actually do functions to manipulate colors and things like that. But I want to go ahead and just do 2 that are going to do that we're going to be able to do some counts on. Power BI can do a lot just inherently in terms of its counts and its the data that it pulls. But I always say, if you want to have more control, go with a DAX measure. It's going to be far better for you in terms of controlling what data makes it into it versus relying on Power BI to make the call on certain pieces of data. So in all measures, we are still here on this data tab. We can go ahead and we can click new measure, and it's going to put it here. We can reference still other queries from the new measures quote unquote table. But when I click new measures, it's going to create a measure within the all measures table. And this we're going to call count underscore school grade, right? So we have on that YOY, we have the school grades. We want to just do a basic count for all of those school grades that we can then break down by year and by A's, B's, C's, etc. So we're going to put in a count. The count is just count, open parentheses, and we are pulling this from the school grades YOY table, and we're counting the grades. Okay, so count school grades YOY grade, and that's it. Enter. It now creates that measure, which Bob will use in a moment. Let's create just one more. I'm sorry, I'm going through this part pretty quick, but I want to make sure you have time to at least create one visual, if possible. Okay, so we have the last one is going to also be count underscore schools. All right, we want to count the number of schools that exist for each district. So we want to be able to do a count of those schools. And so in this case, we're going to call this count, open bracket, open parentheses, and we're going to do school stats 2019. And in this case, we're going to count that district school key. Just seems like a good column to use for a count. Okay, and with that, we have our count school key. Both of these measures, while still referencing other queries, exist in a common location. It's easy to get to them versus having to jump around and try and find, well, did that exist in the YOY? Did it exist in the stats? And so now we have these created. And I apologize to Bob and Chris, but I'm glad we were able to go through all of the modeling. I think it just also highlights that purpose of 80% modeling. And so I want to hand it over to them to walk through some creation of visualizations. If you need to, grab that data model only PBIX file, and I appreciate your time and attention.
All right, thank you, Aaron. All right, so I'm going to share out my screen here pretty quick and get going. I mean, like you said, the good news is the most important part is the data model. Without that, none of these visuals, will make sense. They won't work correctly. So what I've done is, as he just said, that the data model that he just finished is already up there. So if you were behind or you just want to start from here, just go ahead and grab that. So the goal of these visualizations is you spend all that time getting your data ready. What you want to do now is tell a story with the data. And what I always try to do is tell my users that you're looking for trends, you're looking to analyze the data. You're taking a lot of those things that were spreadsheets or charts and things that, just were textual. Now you're going to put a visualization into it so that things that weren't obvious, that were very, far apart as far as numbers, jump out when they're on the screen. So whenever I do a Power BI, the first thing that I try to do, oh, and I'm sorry, I jumped right into it. I have a co-presenter, but because I can only share one screen, Chris Butrago is on here as well. He's going to be taking over my role in FLCODE here soon. So that's why he is on here. We both worked on this together. So, all right. So the first thing that I do is I'm going to insert an image. So if you saw that there was actually the FLCODE logo in there, usually what I like to do is just, put an image, do some branding, just so everyone's kind of aware of, where they are. And, it just kind of allows you to, have your Power BIs, look like they are like a web page, depending upon how you share them out. So one of the things that I have done is I use a lot of these colors that are on here, and I'll show you how to change some of the slicers and things like that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a thing called a slicer. So if you hover over your little visualization toolbox here, one of the things that we're going to need is this little filter here. It's called a slicer. We're going to throw this on the screen. What this does is, for all your visualization, this allows you to do almost like your search criteria. So let me, I've got what I've done in another page. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go off of district name. So I didn't memorize exactly where everything was. So I'm going to find, yep, here's district name. So all that you need to do is just drag and drop. So here's district name. I'm going to drag and drop it over here to the field. And then boom, all the districts show up inside of here. The next thing that I want to do is that school type text that we just did. I want to add that. So I'm going to go back over here to this visualization. I'm going to click this. And then I'm going to go find that school type text. Here it is. Just drag and drop. Boom, there's school type text. All right, so we're doing this right now for the entire state of Florida. So as I filter down, districts, or if I do multiple districts, I may not know exactly how many I'm dealing with. So what I usually like to do is just kind of have a number that shows me how many things I'm working with. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this called a card. I'm going to click that. Oh, now one of the things here, if you notice, I almost messed this up. If I were to click this, it would overwrite that visualization with what I had just clicked. So I'm going to click off to make sure that when I click this, it adds a brand new visualization. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the district grades year over year, and then I'm going to do district number. And then you see here what it does is it pulls the first record. But what I want to do is I want to do a count distinct. So you see here now it shows that I have 67 counties. So we're going to put that up there. I'm going to make this a little smaller. We'll make this a little smaller. And we're going to change how these all look in a second. All right, so now we have all that. So now what we really want to do is see some data on here. So one of the ones that we're going to work with, we have all these different types of charts. The one we're going to work with is a 100% stack column chart. Again, like I said, if I wanted to change how this looks, I can easily just, now that it's selected, I can actually, whatever data I put in here and click any of these, it'll automatically change that. And I can show you that in a second. So what I want to do is I want to show all of the school grades up to 100% and how they, kind of relate through the entire state of Florida. So what we're going to do is our axis is going to be the school year. And what's nice about this is because of the way that we've related the data, it doesn't necessarily matter where I'm pulling some of these columns from because it's going to filter them all correctly. So it may not make sense, with how I pulled some of this data, but just know that because of the way the filtering works, and as long as you do, that little drop down where we did the count, sometimes you may have to do like a unique or things like that. So I'll go over that as I need to. All right, so our axis at the bottom here, we want to have the year. So I'm going to drag and drop the school year is the bottom axis. We want to do, again, the count of grades. So we're going to do school grades because we want to see how all of the schools did, not just the districts. And also we have a lot more data with the schools. So we're going to put that at the bottom. And you see here, it automatically kind of throws this on here and, we're just showing 100%. So we are doing the count of that so that we can get an actual number. So the next thing that we're going to do is we want to see the different grades. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take the grade and we're going to move it into the legend. And this is where we kind of see the cool part of the visualization. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. All right, so as you can see here, there's a bunch of extra information in here that doesn't necessarily apply. So this is where I would normally go through the model and see why it doesn't apply. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to end up filtering all this out for all the pages. But the first thing I want to do is I want to add another visualization real quick, which is a matrix. So a matrix is just a way to show text. And what we're going to do is align it up to this grid. And you'll see why I'm doing that in a second here.
Hey, Bob, while you're doing that, do you want to unselect from the district name slicer just to bring back all 67?
Sorry.
No,
I
you're
didn't
good.
realize I had clicked anything.
No, you're good.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to put the school year in. Oh, sorry. All right. So as you can see, it's it almost aligns with this. So we're going to change the font here in a second. And then drag and drop. Drag and drop.
Try values.
Oh, there we go. Nope. Oh, values. Yep, you're right. Sorry. This is why we have more than one person on this call. All right, so now we're going to quickly change the font of this because as you can see, it doesn't quite align to everything here. So what you do is you click this little middle area here. And if I'm not mistaken, it is, never remember where this is after I do it. Okay, yep. All right, so it's in column headers. So we're going to change the font to 15. And as you see, it kind of puts it, almost aligns it there. And then we're going to do the values. We're going to change that as well to font of 15. And then we're going to go back here because I don't necessarily want a sum on here. I don't want the total in here. Aaron, do you remember exactly where the total is offhand?
To get rid of the total?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's under the formatting, and then you grand total.
Oh, grand totals. There we go. Oh, no. Subtotals. Turn that off. There we go. All right. So sometimes, like, again, each visualization is a little different. So this is not one that I use often, which is why I didn't necessarily know exactly where that was right away. All right. So as you can see, this almost matches up in here. So what I want to do is I'm going to stylize this. So I don't necessarily like a drop down like this. Like you saw, I accidentally clicked on one I didn't necessarily want to click on. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this. And if you hover over here, you see that this kind of disappeared. I'm going to click this little thing here and change it to a drop down. So that makes it just a lot easier because you see I wouldn't accidentally click on anything as I'm clicking around. So that's going to be there. I'm going to do the exact same thing here. I'm going to do a drop down. And the next thing that I want to do is by default, it adds in this little header based on what the name of the column is. Well, I want to stylize this. So I want some colors and stuff. So you see here, it's called a slicer header. We're going to turn that off and we're going to turn on a title. And the title we're going to put here is a district. And then we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to turn off the slicer header and we're going to turn on the title. And we're going to call the title school type. All right. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to kind of have our colors selected. So there's a cool little tool that Microsoft has released. It's called the Microsoft Power Toys. May sound familiar. They used to have this back in the Windows 95 days, and they've released a new version of it. So one of the Power Toys is called the Color Picker. So I actually opened up that image that I had, and I grabbed all the hex values. So one of the hex values is that light gray. So I'm going to grab that hex value. I'm doing this in another screen so you can't necessarily see it. And I'm going to go in here back to that title. And if you saw that there was a background color, so we're going to click that. I'm going to do more options and I'm just going to paste that gray in there. And then obviously you can see black and this light gray don't necessarily go together well. So I'm going to change that to white. And now I am super lazy, so I don't want to do that again. So one of the things I can do is I go to Format Painter. So I just click this little button here, and then I just click here, and then it magically takes all that formatting that I had just done. And then I want to do the same thing to this other area. So I'm going to click Format Painter again. I'm going to click this, and it's going to do the same thing. Now the only thing is if you notice here, it didn't put a title here. That's because we never titled it. So as soon as I put a title here, it's going to start putting some text in there. And there we go. And now I'm going to shrink this a little bit. You can hide this here, but also as you make this smaller, it just kind of hides it on its own. So it's up to you on how you want to do that. If you notice here, as I drag, you see these little red lines that come up. It allows me to align. So I just try to get everything so that it's up in an order. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to drag this up just to make it small. And now it gives me some options. I can make this a little bit bigger. Again, I want to give this a header. So I'm going to do the format painter again. I'm going to paste it in here, go back in here, and it has the same thing where I need to turn, well, the title now is on, but it defaulted to this really long text, you know, trying to guess what it is. So I'm just going to name this grade by school year. And I apologize if I'm going a little fast. All right, so now I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So as I make this bigger, it'll help kind of align a little bit to this bottom area here. So again, these colors, I want to tweak these colors because it just randomly pulls these colors. And actually, sorry, before I do that, so we kind of mentioned this before, and you can see this here. All these numbers were a little too uniform. And then I noticed that the grades, there's additional grades. So if you went through those sheets, you would notice that there were schools that didn't have grades. There were actually cost centers that are not schools that don't have grades. So what we want to do is we want to filter that, and we want to filter that for every single area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first go into the district grades year over year, and I want to, the district stats. I want to grab, and I'm going to do filters on all pages because I want this to filter no matter which one I'm at. And if you see here, I'm going to select all and then unselect anything that's not blank. So I only want to show the ones that actually have text in them. And then the next thing that I want to do is I want to go to the schools grades. I'm going to drag that over, and then the same sort of thing here. So I'm going to select all, but then I'm going to uncheck. You see there's no data there. And then I want to take out this I, N, and P. And then you see once I do this, it kind of, the numbers start to make more sense with, you know, the number of schools and how they've grown. So that's on there now. So the next thing is I want to change those colors. So again, I'm going to click data colors. And now that I have just those 5 colors, which just so happens to align perfectly to the Florida Code colors, I'm going to change those colors to the Florida Code colors. So let me grab my color picker that you can't see and start putting in some colors in here. All right. So that since we're a little bit behind time, I'm not going to go and do all the colors because this will take me a little bit. But that gives you an idea of how to change those colors. The next thing that we want to do is it's not obvious what these numbers are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this. And the thing that we want to do is data labels. So once I turn this on, you'll see it starts to put everything on here. Now, the only issue with this is there's some weird thing in here where it will not show them if it goes a little too far. And this is not, I'm on a different monitor than my other computer, but for whatever reason, it doesn't show all the data labels. I don't know why. To find out the numbers, you can hover over and get those numbers. And I don't know if there's a way to force that. Aaron, I don't know if you've ever run into that. I don't know if I make the font smaller.
You can do something with the font, but
yeah, there we go. Okay, I made it super small, but even then, you see how like there's a couple here that it's not putting those numbers on. I've never been able to figure out how to get it 100% on there. So, all right, so that's pretty much it. You know, that's how we do our first visualization. So if you as you hover over, it gives you those counts. You know how many schools made up those. You know, again, we're looking for trends, so we can kind of see like over here on 2009 was the most year that we had the most A's in the entire state of Florida. You know, just kind of look for those trends, you know, and analyze that data. So now what we're going to do is we're going to name this, you know, so that we know what this is. We're going to call this grades. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a new visualization. So right down here, I'm just going to hit the plus button. And I'm only going to go into 2 because we don't have too much time, and I like to have it open for questions. But I just wanted to show you how easy it is to create the next page of visualizations. So what I'm going to do here is Control A to select everything. I'm going to Control C. And then over here, I'm just going to Control V. And that's it. And the first thing that comes up is if I want to sync my visualizations. So usually I almost always say yes, because what it does is as I selected, like say I selected a school type and I move to the next screen that I create, it remembers because I synchronize them. If I don't synchronize them, then they are completely separate. So if someone was using this to analyze data, I found if you sync it for a bunch of pages, but then don't for one or two, people don't realize that you haven't synced those. So usually I just sync the visualization, and that way I don't worry about someone accidentally, reporting the wrong data. So, and I'll show how that works. So if I click here, like show me only the elementary school grades, and I go back here, you see how elementary is already there. It's because they're synchronized. And if they weren't, if I went back and forth, then it would have said all there still. All right, so one of the things I wanted to do here is, so we see the number of schools here, but again, this is that story that I was talking about. So if you remember, I said that I can take this and I can change it at any time to any type of visualization. And what it'll do is it'll automatically strip out the data that I don't want. So we are going to pick just a regular, we'll do a stacked one, but we're only going to have one piece of data. So I'm going to change that. So you see here, it still has a legend here, but we don't necessarily, we're not going to do school grades. So we're going to take that part out. All that I wanted to show here is the schools and how they have kind of increased. So if you see here at the bottom, you already knew that it was 2,100 schools in 1999 and 3,300 schools there, but to see it visually, that's where it kind of tells that story and jumps out at you to see how much of an increase it is. Like it really puts it in perspective. So, and again, because I've changed this, I probably would go here, change the title, and then change this to number of schools. And then at the bottom here, we'll change this to just schools. And that's it. I mean, the next couple pages, I could have gone through and done, I basically was going to do the exact same thing, just Control A, Control C, Control V, and then change the data. But that's in the final one for you all to download, and you can play around with with the data here. You can select multiple things. So like on here, I could select elementary to give me an idea as to how many, or middle, or if I wanted to find out a combination, you hold down the Control key and you can select multiple pieces of data. So, all right. Well, I didn't want to take too long because I wanted to leave a little bit of time here for some questions. So if anybody has any questions, I don't know if we're moderating it, Shane, or how we want to handle that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so Sherrod was gathering some questions. I just want to awesome. It's great seeing the stuff going through the chat and watching you guys and seeing how we approach things a little bit differently. So that's awesome. Sherrod, were there any questions that we didn't cover that we could go over?
Yeah, let me look. So at the very beginning, Shawnse, he asked, were there any other specific websites that you guys suggest for free how-tos? I know there were a couple that were put in chat. Any other things that weren't mentioned? Anybody else that had? I thank you for those of you that put your comments in the chat about that.
Yeah.
I know we're out of time, so I want to try to catch these other ones.
Oh, I see the one thing about publishing out to users. So it's actually really easy to do that. If you see at the top under home, there's a publish button. When you click publish, it comes up by default with with your workspace. You can create workspaces, which is what I do here at our district. So I've actually created a few different workspaces depending upon the function. So like I have one called like Power BI -district that I share. It's like, specific to anyone in the district can do them. And then if there's other ones, I'll create those specific to those departments. But by default, it wants to publish to your My Workspace, which is a really good place to start. Like when you're developing a Power BI, it allows you to kind of be the only one who's the original owner and then only who you share it out with. So that way it allows you to kind of keep more control over it. But that's pretty much it. You just click the publish button and it comes up with those workspaces.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, go ahead, Shay.
Yeah. So it all depends on your license, because you have to have a certain license in order to share out your content with somebody who doesn't have a license or is outside of your organization. I mean, we could probably spend hours just talking about the options. But if you have your own environment, it's really easy to share out with people in your own organization. If it's outside the organization, then that's where you would get into Power BI embedded or looking at using your Active Directory to manage some of that. But yeah, there's lots of different ways to share. The only caution of the one posting out to the World Wide Web is it posts everything. So you want to make sure that there's no sensitive information with that.
Looks like David also left, David Maddock. I think I'm saying your name right. Thanks for all your comments throughout the video. You've been a great assistance there too to these guys. And it says if you use Teams, creating a team auto creates workspace in Power BI server. I hope, Mike, that helped answer your question about sharing options. If you have further questions about that, feel free to follow up.
If I can, really quick, Sherrod, just.
Oh yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
So just in addition to sharing it out, and Christine brought up a question about how do you restrict the data access, and that could be a whole other presentation, right? But you are able to actually establish row level security and rules within your data model to ensure that even as you publish it, that certain users can only access certain pieces of information. That could include whole queries, and in some cases it could just be like for some of the stuff that we have, that administrators of a particular school can only access their school's information from the Power BI. So that is one way in sharing and also considering the security.
Thank you, Aaron. Looks like we also had Matthew Frankie asking about how do we publish out. Hopefully we've helped answer that. We also have IT guest here at Alachua. Can we use Workspace? Our Workspace is part of our EdFi implementation.
So yeah, that's a little bit more specific question that might only be appropriate for Alachua. So we'll get together with you and see how we can help with the sharing of the workspaces. And it's really great inside of an organization, but when you have another organization that also has an environment, it's a little bit tricky right now. But yeah, all really good stuff. I know we're getting close to time, so I see everybody starting to sweat a little bit. Like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to sweat a little bit. If you want some examples of the work that we've done, some of the visualizations, you can go to floridacode.org. So it's FLCODE.org. That gives you an example. On NEFEC, we have some where we use embedded. We have secure ones. We have publicly available ones. So you're welcome to do that. I'm going to drop two things into the chat real quick. One of them is an evaluation for this session. We'd really love your feedback, especially if you want to see more types of professional learning like this or longer sessions that are targeted towards a specific thing. Please provide your feedback. It is anonymous. And then the other file that I'm dropping in right now is uploading, I guess. I don't know. Is it uploading? It's not uploading right now. So I will send that to you in just a little bit as a follow-up.
And I just wanted to comment. I see Robert Garcia, he wrote about that they mostly use SQL. That's actually what we use for the most part. The reason we wanted to show the training that we did is we actually combined the files from the state along with SQL views. So what we've given you today, you can actually pull into all of your other views in the future as you move on with Power BI, so that you can associate what has been reported to the state, like the school grade, some of those test data, and combine it with up to the date to the minute data that you get from your SIS. So everything that we've given you today, in theory, can be pulled into any of your future Power BIs along with SQL. Combine it with SQL.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for adding that piece on there, Bob. I did actually get it to upload. So the presentation link's in there. There's also a link to those resources, and we'll drop a copy of the video once we edit out all the ums and uhs. And we'll drop that in that folder. So I think we have everything. If there's any other questions or comments, but your feedback is going to be the most helpful. Thank you, everybody. Bob, Chris, Sherrod, Aaron, Sean, say I love your background, but appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today, and we look forward to your feedback. So thank you all.
And one last thing I'll say is we have a FLCODE Summit coming up where we're going to dive deeper into some of these use cases that districts have, and in specific to data standards to the EdFi data standard. So we really encourage you to sign up for that. If you don't have a link for signing up for the FLCODE Summit, please just send us an email. We'll be happy to get that link to you to register. You can also visit the FloridaCode.org website. There's an events tab there, and you can register from there and get some information. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Bob, Shane, Aaron, Chris. Man, you guys did a fantastic job. I learned a lot, and I'm really thankful. For those of you that still have questions, we might could hang around for 5 or 6 minutes or something to help answer some questions. But I guess we could call that the official end of the video, the training. So
Sounds good.
all right. Thank you, guys.